Welcome to another episode of Washington in Focus. I'm your host, Tim Klauser, here with the Center Square's Washington State Investigative reporter, TJ Martinell, talking about a recent breaking story of his involving hundreds of pages of records from the state attorney general's office, discussing with the Senate Majority Leader how to potentially overturn a state Supreme Court ruling recognizing income as property as a way to push a graduated progressive income tax potentially onto residents like you and I. TJ, why don't you tell us a little bit about the records that you got and how opponents to the millionaire's tax are responding?
Well, I mean, what happened is I got public records back. I filed a public records request requesting communications within the Attorney General's office regarding the legality of the millionaire's tax. I was really curious to see what emails they were getting from people saying, "Hey, is this thing legal? Is this going to survive a court challenge?" All this stuff. Just there was a lot of questions, and they're the top you know attorneys for state agencies and all that kind of stuff. So they're going to be issuing legal opinions or giving legal advice. So the other day, I got a massive batch of records, and it was internal communications within the Attorney General's office. It was also communications with them and primarily Senator Jamie Peterson about his millionaire's tax. And what is so remarkable about these records is that they were very, very explicit and very, very precise about what the purpose of the bill is. And so in normal world, you introduce a bill like a tax, and it's intended to tax certain types of activities, and it's intended to raise revenue for certain types of programs. That's the purpose, on the surface, on paper. But in these emails, he made it clear that the purpose of him introducing this bill is not to impose a tax on millionaires, and it's not intended to fund these programs. It's intended to overturn a century's worth of legal precedent in which income is considered property under our state constitution. And what that means is you cannot have a progressive income tax in our state. You can have a flat rate income tax that's below 1%, but you cannot have a progressive income tax where different incomes are taxed at different levels. And that's due to a provision in our state constitution that was added in the 1930s. And advocates for that amendment at the time said the reason for the amendment was so that they could tax income as a separate class of property than land. So they're trying to get this precedent overturned in which every single Supreme Court that has ever existed in Washington state history since this ruling has said income is property. They even said at one point in a ruling, we're done having this conversation. If you want a progressive income tax, go to the voters. And so this is the purpose of this bill. This has completely destroyed any advocacy for this millionaire's tax that is only going to apply to the wealthy, and it's making the wealthy pay their fair share, whatever that means. That's gone. No one can say that because we have emails from the prime sponsor himself saying the purpose of this bill is to overturn a legal case law of a century so that we can impose a
Mhm.
progressive income tax that could apply to every single person in the state that makes income, and we can tax them at any rate that we want. So that's pretty much what's happening. And the Attorney General's office was very much I just, for lack of a better word, they were very much in favor of helping this outcome. And that's kind of what muddles the waters a little bit, is that it's not as if they gave legal advice from a neutral perspective of, we don't know if this is legal or if it'll stand up. I mean, they did say, we don't know if the Supreme Court will rule in your favor, but we agree that we do not believe that income is property. That was the legal opinion of the Attorney General's office as it exists right now. So,
It's interesting because I mean, the House and the Senate, they have their own lawyers. The AGO is the people's lawyer. They represent us, the residents of the state of Washington. They're supposed to be upholding and defending the Constitution. But here you have records showing AGO staff directing or coaching these state Democratic leaders on how to potentially pose this question to the Supreme Court.
right.
Not saying that they can directly overturn it themselves, but how do they get this to the Supreme Court? And you're saying this is a millionaire's tax, but it's not intended as a tax on millionaire. It's intended as a test run to get this before residents like you and I and others that don't make $1 million. And
Right.
that was asked of the state Democratic leaders repeatedly throughout the
Yes.
last
Yeah.
session, was that, will this hit everyday Washingtonians next year or the year after? And their answer was repeatedly, we don't want to bind future legislatures. That's not our job. And now you have these records saying, where Senate Majority Leader Jamie Peterson said himself, I would like the 9.9% tax rate to just be the start.
Yes. I mean,
So
yeah.
who's next?
Well, and I think that they say they don't want to bind future legislatures. Well, okay, then you don't say this only applies to the millionaires. I mean, if you can change a law, then it there's that saying, I think it was Ronald Reagan who said, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program. There's nothing more temporary than a tax uh, that's applied only to specific people. The IRS income tax, the federal income tax, only applied to the very wealthy when it was first introduced, and now, as we all know, pretty much everyone has to file an income tax return. And there's an entire legal industry that is dedicated to navigating the IRS tax code. And theoretically, we could see that happen here. And I think that's part of not to uh, go too far off on a tangent, but I think going back, the one thing that I found really unsettling with the Attorney General's office is when Solicitor General Noah Purcell noted to Jamie Peterson that his bill did not have an emergency clause. And so emergency clauses, for people who don't know, does two things. The bill takes effect immediately upon the governor's signature rather than 90 days. Two, it prevents a referendum from being run where voters get to weigh in on whether to uphold or reject that bill in the November election. And so he literally says in the email, if you don't have this, there could be a referendum run against it. And that begs the question of, so what you're saying is the voters would overturn this yet again, which they've done 10 times over decades since this Supreme Court decision. I mean, Initiative 1098 would have imposed a progressive income tax in 2010. It was it was decisively defeated. I think there was only a couple precincts in Seattle that voted in favor of it, like these hardcore areas, but everywhere else it was overwhelmingly rejected by voters, which is why they've turned to these legal maneuvers, because they know if they go, frankly, it's very obvious. If they thought voters supported this, they would go to voters.
Yeah, these are lawmakers that are supposed to be representing the people. The Democrats, they hold the majority in both chambers of the legislature, yet they don't want to allow their own constituents the ability to weigh in on this. And should they pass it? Okay, at least they gave the voters a chance, but they're trying to stop them. And now you have organizations like Let's Go Washington with a case expedited to the Supreme Court
Right.
to potentially allow a referendum later this month or next month. But at the same time, we have another case going on, I believe, in Thurston County or somewhere down towards Olympia, to potentially block the implementation of this income tax, this millionaire's tax. And that could take months to a year or more. And
Yeah.
it's destined to hit the state
I,
Supreme Court, which is where things are really going to get interesting, TJ, because one of
yeah.
the governor's recent appointees, Colleen Medley, she'll be up for election later this year, so maybe she'll leave the bench before the case reaches the Supreme Court. But Noah Purcell, who you mentioned, in January, he came out and said he gave the strongest endorsement possible of Colleen Medley. But meanwhile, he's in the background coaching lawmakers on how to overturn this tax. And now they're putting a justice on the Supreme Court, who worked with Purcell, who worked with Ferguson when he was attorney general, who is aligned with them and could potentially rule in favor of this tax.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much what's going on. And what's so funny about him saying that we need an emergency clause is that the tax doesn't take effect until 2028, and the state doesn't begin collecting revenue until 2029. So we're talking 3 years before the state starts seeing any revenue from this. So what's the emergency? If this was an emergency, the tax would you would begin collecting the tax as soon as possible, if that was so important. I think the other thing I mean, there's so many different things to be said about this discovery and these records and this, because let's say it goes all the way to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court just says, you know what? I don't know what you guys aren't getting. Income is property in Washington state. Stop. Like, we're done. Great. Now the tax is overturned. How much money has been wasted on this bill? And not to mention the fact that how many millionaires have already left the state and will never come back.
Mhm.
Like, how
It'll
much
be
is this gonna cost, not just taxpayers, but it's gonna cost the state revenue when the real estate excise tax goes downhill because nobody wants to buy a home, over certain amounts of money that generates a lot of the revenue because they're like, I have tons of money." And then they proposed a wealth tax in the past, which I also got the legal memo for as part of this public records about whether or not a wealth tax could survive legal scrutiny. I mean, you've already had Jeff Bezos leave the state, move to Florida, sell his stock, and reap the rewards, and the state didn't get a penny. And this was before the income tax. And then the Starbucks CEO is leaving or has announced he's leaving the state. And they just announced today that Starbucks is opening up a headquarters in Nashville. I mean, I don't think they fully, either they do and they don't care, or there's another reason, or they don't understand that people are leaving. And the tech sector
Mhm.
is what has propelled Washington's economy from being kind of just ho hum in the 2010s to being one of the big powerhouses in the country. I mean, couple of years ago, Washington State was just flying high as far as tax revenue was concerned, and the economy, and there was jobs everywhere. And downtown Seattle was being basically transformed because of the economic boom. How many cranes were in the air when activity was going on. And now you're having corporations like Starbucks moving in response potentially in response to this kind of stuff. So it's just, what's the unseen cost of this legal maneuver? Because we can't even, it's not even appropriate to call it a millionaire's tax anymore, because they're not collecting revenue for 3 years. And its actual purpose, by the prime bill sponsor's own words, is to overturn a legal precedent. So which means as soon as that legal precedent is overturned, they're going to go back and change the tax. They're going to change who it applies to, and they're going to change what the rate is. So like I said, these records have completely destroyed advocacy of this tax as a tax, because it's not.
Mhm. It's a pivotal moment in state history, and the outcome now rests in the hands of the state Supreme Court when they potentially rule on the constitutionality of this income tax later this year or next year. Uh, for the audience listening, 5 of those 9 Supreme Court seats are up for election this fall, with a few conservative challengers entering the
Mhm.
race, kind of giving residents an option to weigh in through the ballot on the income tax before a potential referendum comes up, should it. But TJ, I appreciate you covering this. It's something we'll keep our eyes on the months ahead, especially as those Supreme Court elections come up. But for anyone hoping to catch that coverage, you can read it at thecentersquare.com. Otherwise, thank you for joining us for another episode of Washington in Focus.